Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Megan Doherty, the director of the Museum of the White Mountains. As we gather together, we're all on Indigenous lands. Those of us at the Museum of the White Mountains are on Indakina, the ancestral and present homeland of the Abenaki and Wabanaki peoples. We're grateful for their stewardship of these lands and waterways. For those of you on Zoom, we put some links in the chat where you can learn more about the Indigenous histories of your place at native-land.ca, as well as the Abenaki people of Northern New England through the Musée des Abenaki in Quebec. For our Spotlight on Humanities and Sustainability Studies lecture today, we're joined by Christine Destrom. Christine is a visual artist who has produced monumental public participation art installations, engaging people in the intersection of environmental and social issues. Her talk today is about the steps she took to figure out how to engage the public in a way that opened hearts and how to design a framework solid enough so that the participation is inclusive, non-intimidating, fun, and successful. This event is supported by a Spotlight on Humanities and Sustainability Studies grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Please join me in welcoming Christine.
Great, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to come to Plymouth State. My experience here doing a project called 10,000 Steps was really memorable because Plymouth State was such a joy to work with. So thank you for inviting me to come back. So back when I was a full-time studio artist, painting and making monotype prints, I read an article in the New Yorker that changed me. Leasing the Rain by William Finnegan was about the global effects of water privatization in general, but specifically about a village in Bolivia, where the villagers paid for and built their own well to supply clean water, only to have it sold to the multinational corporation Bechtel by the Bolivian government. The villagers were never compensated. In this article, I learned 5 million people die every year from preventable water-related diseases because they don't have access to clean water. That statistic haunted me. The fact that multinationals were buying up water sources scared me because in the not so distant future, the demand for clean water will exceed the supply. Those who have control of sources of clean water have positioned themselves for economic advantage and power. Additionally, the bottled water industry expends valuable energy resources and generates a tremendous amount of plastic waste. The more I learned, the more alarmed I became because I believe water is a basic human right. It took me a while to realize why this article had made such a deep impression. Harrisville, New Hampshire, where I live, has 5 significant lakes and even more smaller ones in an area of about 20 square miles. I live on one of them. So the beauty and the magic of water is part of my daily existence. And also, when I looked back at my early representational landscape paintings, almost all of them were about water. However, being surrounded by such abundance made it easy for me to take water for granted. So what could I do as a fine artist to call attention to water sustainability? For 10 years, I ran Art for Water, and then Art and Dialogue, creating 8 major public participation projects and worked nationally with thousands of people creating art installations. This afternoon, I'll dive deeply into 3 of the projects and then talk more about what I learned regarding how people respond, how art can be a motivational force, ways to engage the public that opens their hearts, and things to consider when designing a framework for a public engagement project. Before the public participation work, I made non-representational paintings and monotype prints. The path to public engagement was not straight. At first, I believed naively or egocentrically that if my fine art were compelling enough, viewers would be inspired to do something about the shrinking availability of clean water. I made some prints that were accepted into a large group exhibit down in Massachusetts and was asked with 2 other artists to speak. So I thought, aha, Perfect opportunity to share disturbing statistics. However, when I set up for my talk in front of my work, this idea didn't feel right because before my turn, I heard the sculptor Natalie Miebach talk about her work. Large three-dimensional sculptures using Tinker toys to interpret actual weather data. A light bulb came on. I realized that unlike my artwork, Natalie's medium and her message were connected, which made it powerful. Her work is inclusive and fun. Who doesn't love Tinker toys? And serious. I realized it's easier to get the message across non-representationally in 3 dimensions rather than in paintings or prints. It was a big night for me. I did my talk, but it was not about the shrinking availability of clean water. It was about how to make a monotype. On the drive home, I was jazzed because I knew I was about to embark on something completely new, an installation. I had no idea how to make a 3-dimensional piece about the disturbing topic of water scarcity, but I was excited to try. The one thing I did feel strongly about was making work that expanded perceptions. Shock factor art preaches only to the choir, and I wanted to reach as many people as possible, so it was important for the installation to be inviting, non-threatening, and easy to understand. I wanted to make artwork that was about the message and about the connection between people and water. I first thought about using hanging strips of silk to represent the number of people who die every day. However, when I considered the cost of the silk and the carbon footprint of shipping that much silk from China to New Hampshire, I nixed that idea. I let this concept marinate while thinking more about what I wanted to say. This was intentional because I trust in the creative process. My experience is that once an idea is conceived, but before it's set into motion, the path unfolds if the idea is viable. It may not lead to where you thought you'd end up, but that's okay. I wandered around in the woods, by streams, by lakes and towns and stores, hoping for something to inspire me. Then, even though typically I avoid them, I went into a big box supermarket and was bowled over by the bottled water aisle. When I saw the seemingly endless stacks of water bottles with clear plastic caps, I realized my message could be expanded to include the environmental impact of bottled water production and consumption, and its connection to the shrinking availability of and access to clean water. The bottle caps were the perfect medium, and this medium was the message. The first installation was called 13,699 because that's how many people die every day at the time. This was done a long time ago. A 10 by 10 by 8-foot room of clear plastic recycled water bottle caps strung on monofilament. Each cap represents a person who dies every day from preventable water-related diseases. 5 or 6 people can fit inside this piece and be surrounded by hanging bottle caps. At first, I had thought of making a pergola-type structures that viewers could walk through, but that provided a path that was too easy. I wanted viewers to stop long enough to experience the magnitude of this humanitarian crisis. When I came up with the idea, I thought it would look industrial, but the caps ended up looking like water bubbles and they capture the light eerily. When I started this project, I had no intention of public engagement. I planned to make the piece myself, but instead hundreds of people helped me. So I had caps hung in my studio and just a few lines of them because I was trying to figure out what I was doing. And an artist friend came to visit and asked me what I was doing, explained it to her. And she said, you got to take this out into the public, you know, set up a table in front of the Toadstool, which is the bookstore in Peterborough, and talk to people and tell them what you're doing and get them to help you to work on it. I never would have come up with that on my own. I would have been in my studio for years stringing bottle caps. But when I thought about what she said, at first I recoiled, but then when I thought about it, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. So I I put it all into motion, but the first thing I had to do was get bottle caps. And I live in a very small town and people have wells, so there aren't a lot of bottled water purchases in Harrisville. So I had to go to a bigger city in Keene and ask the public works director if he would be willing to have his staff set them aside, and they were. So I went up, every few weeks and got these bins of really dirty, smelly bottle caps and washed them in my front loader. And and it was really very time consuming, but they did come out nice and clean. However, when I first started doing it, I was just throwing them all in the drum like that. And one day I had my butt sticking out of the washing machine and my stepdaughter walked by and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm picking bottle caps off the drum." And she's like, "What?" And so she came in and I showed her what I was doing. And she said, "Why don't you use a net bag?" I was like, well, okay. Why didn't I think of that? Just like the whole public participation thing. I didn't think of that either. So my first foray into engaging the public was going down to Boston to an environmental fair. And I took the tea from Alewife into the city, and I just carried all of the supplies and set up some tent signs and talked to people, and I had a bunch of people sit at the table and string the bottle caps. But I hadn't really thought about transporting monofilament. I had never worked with monofilament. And this is what it looked like when I got it home. I had piles of bottle caps that looked like this. And so I quickly learned to wrap them around foam core. So as I said, I really just jumped into this without knowing what I was doing. This was what my friend saw when she came to my studio, the strings hanging in front of my press there. And then, so I started slowly inviting people to my studio. This is an art group from the local high school that came to my studio. And I had to end up renting a space in the mill in town. And at first I thought I was going to hang it from the ceiling on a big grid. But when I started talking to exhibition venues about this, no one was interested in that. They said, if you come up with something, another way to exhibit it, we're interested. So I bought a frame. I bought steel railings from a farm supply place and made that frame. And then we just put the grids on the top and secured them with C-clamps. And so then I just went around to schools and talked about the details of water scarcity and had people help me with the caps. And at first I was counting how many strings were done, and then I gave up on that. As it came together, I realized it's just more important the way it looks. No one is going to actually count if there's 13,699 bottle caps. And then when I was worried about my deadline, I invited all my friends to go to a local pub and drink beer and string bottle caps. And it slowly came together. And that's when I realized I was actually going to meet my deadline for the first exhibit. And that's what it looked like. So the opening was at the Sharon Arts Center in Peterborough, which no longer exists. I mean, the Sharon Arts Center no longer exists. One of the participants from Antioch came with a friend, and he rushed over to the piece and he said, "I worked on that." He was so excited. And so when I watched him and I watched his excitement about his part in the participation, I realized that the project was not just a way to educate the public and raise awareness, but it was a path to empowering engagement. This young man felt like an insider because he had a relationship to the project and the issue. And right then I knew my next piece would be our piece. Rather than participants working on producing my idea, I had to share ownership with each person. So they'd even be more invested in the message and then more likely to take positive action about the issue. I noticed that people viewing the piece were drawn by wonder to the size and appearance of the suspended white discs. But then when they learned what each of the caps represented and how many people had worked to make the piece possible, there was a shift towards reverence in their demeanor. They too were invited to join everyone inside, the ones suffering, and the ones trying to do something about it. Before I began another project, I invited a group of friends, creative friends, to bounce ideas around about the ways in which non-artists can have a successful art-making experience. We didn't come up with any realistic concepts at that meeting, but the process of talking about it helped me realize the importance of simplicity in designing a public engagement project. I went to my source for simplicity, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, and found his quote, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness." As I contemplated this, I saw the parallel between the interconnection of water and mankind. Then the tsunami in Thailand happened, and as I watched footage of massive destruction, it felt like a screaming message from the earth, "Wake up and respect me." Then I thought about how hurricanes and storms were becoming more severe and asked myself, if the earth communicates via water, how are words like water? All the water on the planet is interconnected through the hydrologic cycle, and all the rivers and streams flow from a massive network into the oceans. A river of words that represented this interconnection of water, which is also a metaphor for all life, became obvious. Participants could write or draw anything they wanted on paper waves, and I could assemble them into a river. So I made a model of little torn pieces to see how it would look. And then I wrote a prose piece about how words are like water to be read after the presentation of the about the global water crisis. So this would be to like kind of a transition from all of the harsh information to like looking at the bigger picture before they immerse themselves in drawing and writing. So I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts from that. And they're kind of disjointed because I pulled them from different parts. So the Stream of Conscience installation is inspired by a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. If we think of the oceans and the earth's waterways as representing life, each of us is like a ripple or a wave. Individuals rise, crest, roar to the shore, and then slip back to join all the other waves or ripples that have been or are about to be. For a moment in time, we are distinct, but we are never separate." Second excerpt. "Water is the only natural compound that manifests in three forms: fluid, solid, and gas. Words can be fluid in that they adapt to a situation, or can be insincere or non-committal. Words can be solid in that they commit to an ideal and stand up for a belief, or are cold and inflexible. And then there's gas. Words can cast a fog over reality or mean nothing or have no weight, or they can lift someone's spirits." And the conclusion was, "Think of your written contributions as individual drops that, when combined, make a powerful river of words. Just like rushing water has the power to generate electricity, your words generate energy. You can use them to change the world, heal wounds, advocate for the disadvantaged, foster peace and reconciliation, and speak the truth. What you say and what you do affects everyone and everything. We are interconnected, just like all these paper waves in the stream of conscience and all the water on the planet." That was the end. So when I came up with this idea, I reached out to major paper mills for cover weight paper donations and invited schools to participate. And called it the Stream of Conscience. Turned out to be easily adapted to alternative prompts depending on where I was, which organizations I was working with. So some schools wanted it to be about creative writing. But then environmental groups usually had their own specific message. So I worked with people of all ages and skill levels, kindergartners, Alzheimer's patients, PhDs, everybody, the public. I was originally going to call it River of Words until I discovered there was already a national poetry project with that name. But that turned out to be a happy accident, because when I called the headquarters to apologize and ask their permission to use the name just once, because the ball had already started rolling with the exhibit text. One of their volunteers put me in touch with the Connecticut River Conservancy, and I ended up doing a multi-year project with them, which they renamed The Power of Water, The Power of Words. So, so this is the first time it was installed at the Sharon Arts Center, and this was at Antioch and Adult Daycare Center, Peabody Essex Museum. It's been all over the country. It's great. This is the Sharon Arts Center. So I came up with Stream of Conscience after I came up with River of Words, and just realized, anyway, then I realized I could just switch over to Stream of Conscience and drop the River of Words. So the Sharon Arts Center, this was a great opportunity because the exhibit was up for 2 months, and I could set up a table with blank paper waves and markers, and invite people to write their own wave or draw their own. And then they would just put them in a bin, and I would come by a couple of times a week and just add them. And so by the end, it was really a much bigger stream of conscience, River of Words. So that's in Idaho, New York Aquarium. Oh, and I always had a couple of monitors in the exhibits. One with slides showing people working on the pieces, and then one with typeset text, because sometimes, especially that one in Idaho where the wall was so tall, people can't read them all. And what I discovered happily was that people wanted to read them all. And this is the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in Manhattan. So one of the things that I did with this project was this is one of the slides that I would show the audience or the children, the students. And I would bring in a 5-gallon jerry can filled with water, and I would show them the girls and women who are the ones who have to gather the water and carry it 3 miles approximately. That's the average. And each of those 5-gallon jugs weighs 40 pounds. And those girls are carrying them with just like a canvas strap. So I would invite the students to come and try to pick it up. And the teacher would give the students a local reference for 3 miles. And, we'd have them imagine trying to carry 40 gallons of water for 3 miles. And of course, there was always the boy who said, I can do that. This is Rula Awad. She's a professor of architecture at the University of Idaho, and she took the project over to the Middle East, Palestine. Just the Brattleboro Museum. Oh, and then I was asked to do an outdoor version, and there was a bit of a learning curve with that because I had to research materials and ended up using floor tiles, like rubber floor tiles. And I tested them in the spring because I had to order the materials way in advance. It was going up in the summer, and I had to, I had to have them all cut. So I tested them, in like probably April, and wrote on them with a lot of different markers and put them out in the weather. And I was able to wash them off after they had been out for a couple of weeks. So I thought, great, I'll be able to reuse this a million times. And but then it sat at the Montshire Museum for 3 months, and the sun baked in everything that people had written on it. And I couldn't get the letters off, or the writing or anything. We also, the other experiment with this was, hey, let's just let people read the signage and let them write something on their own without having any input. And a lot of people did that, but they didn't write about water. So we had to rethink that. But anyway, it did get recycled. It went to the Keene State sculpture department for materials. So the final project I'm going to share with you today is not about the environment. It's called The Gift of Respect. And I started to be asked to do projects that weren't related to environmental issues. And so I decided to change the name from Art for Water to Art in Dialogue so that I could, broaden my horizons. So I did this in collaboration with Joni Doherty, who at the time was the director of the New England Center of Civic Life at Franklin Pierce University in Rindge. Because students were concerned about aggression in public discourse, the FPU president asked Joni to address this through a public engagement project. We had already done a couple of projects together on campus. So she and I spent a lot of time talking about our primary goal, which was to eliminate aggression on campus. Our mission was to break down barriers between students by creating a space for them to learn more about each other. We came up with the idea of students transforming personal stories through decorating plain craft paper gift boxes with unconventional supplies like chains, nails, feathers, doll parts, old toys. I asked all the faculty that we talked to just empty their junk drawers, and we had all kinds of stuff. It was great. The boxes were a perfect counterpoint to storytelling and personal essay writing. The stories were placed in the boxes with the option to use the final piece as a gift of reconciliation. We met with freshman English faculty to invite them to participate, and almost the entire freshman class took part over the duration of the fall semester. Joni and I wrote our own personal essays and decorated our own boxes as examples. To kick off the project, we went to each class to share our stories in boxes. My story was about an incident that happened to my son, Jesse, when he was in high school, in which he took the high road after being betrayed and humiliated by his best friend. In the middle of my story, during my first presentation at 8 a.m., I started to ugly cry, but I continued to tell the story. This made Joni cry too. The students stared at us, wide-eyed and gaping. And I felt like a total idiot and was embarrassed by my lack of professionalism. However, at the end of the class, 2 really large athletes approached me and thanked me for telling that story. I apologized for crying, and they said, "Oh, don't be sorry. It was important and powerful." So Joni and I had to do that same presentation like the next day and the next day and the next day, but I was able to get through them without tears. But my unrehearsed outburst, but by that, the tone was set inadvertently for a safe space for vulnerability, because I'm sure word spread fast. And that's exactly what needed to happen because aggression stems from a fear of vulnerability. So as the students began sharing their stories, I realized this project was way more powerful than I could have ever imagined. We, along with students and faculty, listened to African-American students talk about what it feels like to be called the N-word or to be stalked and bullied. Accounts of sexual assault and how it changed a person's life and psyche, and tales of having to defend disabled loved ones. You could hear a pin drop. The storytelling happened first in small groups, then with the whole class. Then next, students wrote brief essays and then participated in studio sessions to transform their stories into art boxes. By the time the students were ready to start on making their boxes, which sometimes turned into sculptures, they had already been steeped in compassion and understanding. They jumped into the art making with enthusiasm. When they finished their boxes, we met again back in the classroom to share their experience with the process. So we set up this long table with tools and supplies. And one of the instructions was, don't think about what your box is going to look like. Just pick out whatever calls to you, take it back to the table and look at it all, and then start assembling. Later, as students shared their experiences with making their boxes, many realized how each of the items chosen represented different aspects of their stories. This helped them to gain insight about their experiences and themselves. For instance, choosing a giant screw initially represented a screwed up calamity, but now also indicated the feeling of having been taken advantage of being screwed. Faculty reported back to us that this was the most affable freshman class they'd ever experienced. We were asked to repeat the project the following year. It was very gratifying to see how enthusiastic these students were about decorating their boxes. They just jumped right into it. Oops. And at the end, we had an exhibit. We set up all the boxes in an auditorium, and students were invited, if they wanted to come up and speak about the process of hearing the stories, of writing their own stories, and then making their boxes. And so, and they were able to do that for in front of the entire school. So what I've learned. So I really think it's important to take into consideration both the heart and the mind. So when the intellect and the heart are sparked, an internal alignment occurs that generates momentum. When I read that New Yorker article, I'd also been reading about many other alarming current events. Why did that article motivate me to leave my comfort zone and act? Because I really did leave my comfort zone. I was petrified of public speaking. I didn't really like to engage with people. It was really scary for me. But it made me realize how much I love water. And I love water enough to change my behavior. So how did that happen? So the author, William Finnegan, wrote about the lack of water access, and he also wrote about how it impacted real people, which moved me. I tried to follow his lead by using personal stories or actual experience to represent the statistics. So bringing the 5-gallon jerry can really brought that home to a lot of people, not just little children, but all people. And also, you know, when I worked on the Power of Water, Power of Words, the Connecticut River Conservancy was gathering feedback for the relicensing of 5 hydropower facilities along the Connecticut River. And so it was really important for their audience, all the people who live along where the Connecticut River is, to hear about what's going on globally with water and the whole issue of water scarcity. So when, you know, learning about how many people do not have access to clean water, and then, you know, hearing about how the hydropower facilities will impact the health of the Connecticut River, they learned about that before they created their input. So when they were faced with the reality of scarcity, beloved local resources take on a much more significance for them. So when you hear about an issue, it's one thing, but then when you immediately transform those feelings evoked by making art or writing, that's a life-changing pathway to engagement. That's basically what I did. I read that article and I have to do something. And what do? I make art. So, but having other people do that rather than, you know, being passively overwhelmed, it kind of gets things into motion. When one feels empowered, you're more likely to act. So I don't have data on this because I didn't have the resources to collect data, but I have heard from many people years later that that they don't run the dishwasher or washing machine until it's full because of the stream of conscience, or I've never bought a bottle to bottle water since seeing 13,699. So that's the only data I have. When one is presented with unsettling information, the tendency is to shake it off or distance yourself or myself into numbness. We move away from it. So the quiet, focused time spent on making art or writing after discussing a difficult issue allows the information to be approached and processed slowly, further strengthening the connection between the mind and the heart. The act of sharing what was made or written within the group reinforces the concept of interconnection, and hearing and seeing how others respond validates everyone's efforts and builds community. So when you think of the framework, it's a good idea to take a big picture approach, because an art installation program intended to raise awareness is not about the art. It's about the message, it's about the process, it's about making connection. However, it's still important to make something that's compelling enough so that you can get it exhibited. So, but keep in mind that many small contributions make a powerful statement. So avoid overwhelm. Art materials, research art materials that lend themselves to all skill levels. The least precious, the better. Most people are intimidated by professional art supplies and are liberated by repurposed, recycled, or everyday objects, so that mistakes are no big deal. Make each contribution manageable enough to be completed within your time frame, and inspire with data and context. So many people feel powerless when faced with challenging information. Use data as a context for inspirational personal stories, such as this one blog from Dr. Wendy Pavich, Hydrophilia, Becoming Water Wise. So I'm going to read from her blog. So I came across an interesting article today by Arif Belgami in one of Pakistan's papers, the Express Tribune. The author reflects on the devastating impacts of environmental degradation in Pakistan. Not surprisingly, in this ultra-arid part of the world, one of the most daunting environmental problems is water scarcity. In response to his country's water troubles, Belgami pledges in the new year to keep the water from running down the drain each morning as he shaves by using a mug to hold the water. At first glance, his gesture may seem insignificant, laughable even. However, Belgami then goes on to crunch the numbers. He estimates that he lets about 5,000 gallons of water go to waste each morning. Over the course of a year, he's wasted 1,900 gallons. He then goes on to estimate the demographics of shaving, a populace of 170 million, 50% of which are male, 50% of which are clean shaven. If all these clean shaven men were to be equally conscious of their water use as a group, they would conserve 40 billion gallons of water, or enough to grow 70,000 acres of wheat, 24,000 acres of rice, or serve the needs of the city of Karachi for 50 days. And while one might argue that these numbers underestimate current good behavior, shutting off the faucet between rinses, and overestimate water use, regardless, the point is well made. If we all pitch in just a little, we're all better off. End of quote. So my other tip is to mind your own business. I don't tell participants what they should do, but what I learned and what I did about it. Many times teachers asked me if I had an action list to leave behind, but I didn't, because I believe it's more important to give people the freedom to have their own response. If each person decides how to act, there'll be a larger variety of solutions and ownership. Also, another list of things we should do instills guilt and overwhelm. So how can art be motivational? We tend to take care of the things we love. We may not realize how much we love something until our hearts are touched. When people invest personally through art making or writing, they take ownership of what they created. When working within a framework that results in creation of something personally meaningful, participants feel pride in their accomplishment. That feeling is enhanced by having their contribution taken seriously enough to be exhibited in an installation that may appear in museums and galleries. The installation itself is a manifestation of the power of many small actions combined. Ownership and feeling proud inspire action. When a person makes something about a specific topic that is publicly displayed, they're more likely to align their personal behavior with the message. So in conclusion, be clear with your intentions and then trust that opportunities will arise. When I first began to use my creative skills to call attention to water issues, I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I had to do something. Knowing that one doesn't know opens the mind. Moving forward or even around in circles for a while creates momentum that generates responses from many surprising sources. The path unfolds when you stop trying to force it. Remember, water always takes the path of least resistance, but it always gets to where it wants to go. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was really wonderful. I really appreciate not only sharing the process, but sharing the pitfalls. I think it's so often the impetus to be, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but the impetus to be perfect and to kind of present this perfection in the world and, and to kind of, show the kind of finished product.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate the kind of transparency and honesty about your process and about your journey. And I think especially for students here in person and on Zoom, it's a super important lesson to keep learning and to learn at any, stage in our journeys, but it's really wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I usually try not to start the questions, but I was compelled to. So, but we'll open it up to questions in the room or on Zoom. In person to get us started. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just wondering, do you store all of that in your studio? All of the files and the bottle caps?
I have a very large studio that's 2 stories, and then I had the mill space. So I have about 1,200 square feet at home. I had another 600 square feet at the mill. So, and I used every inch of, yeah.
Yeah, the like material implications of the scale are really,
yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, and also I was painting and printmaking in between, like making installations. So yeah, it was crazy.
Other questions in person or on Zoom? Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ever get so overwhelmed that you just wanted to stop?
Yes, a lot. Yeah, it was, yeah. Did I ever get so overwhelmed that I wanted to stop? Yes. Yeah, it's a lot of work. And my husband kept saying that when I first started 13,699 and there were baskets of wet bottle caps in our dining room. He was saying, this is enough. This is a lot of work. This is hell. This is too much work. And it had just begun. But yeah, I was motivated. I really felt I was really, really motivated. So yeah, but there have been projects that were more challenging than others, let's say. I didn't show you all the projects I did, so there were a lot more.
I wonder, I feel like it says something about like the moment I went to graduate school, but I couldn't help early on in your talk while you were talking about kind of what is the role of participants, and how to kind of shift that engagement. I was really, I was thinking a lot about Do Chicago and like projects where there, maybe was the kind of sense that there was a kind of that everyone was acknowledged, but there was also maybe in retrospect a sense of exploitation, or how to. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the like your shifting approach to what it means to make things that are participatory and how to kind of acknowledge other people's contributions and sort of maintain your own sense of self in the projects, or kind of where that how you've negotiated that balance over the course of these projects.
Right. Well, that story I told you about the student who came in and saw the piece and who was so excited about stringing the bottle caps. That's when I thought, oh yes, I need to do something that people can take more ownership. And so it took me a long time to come up with the Stream of Conscience project. I thought about it for a really long time, and but I really did want to give more ownership. Now, okay, there was one point I thought I was going to have the people participating tear their own paper, but after working with a couple of hundred people and getting rectangular pieces of paper, I decided that was not a very good idea, because just a lot of people, not all of them, but a lot of people just like automatically have to do something that's really square. So, so I took that back, but they were encouraged to basically write whatever they wanted or draw. They didn't even have to do anything. They could just make marks on it if they wanted to. So, so yeah, and then the gift of respect was something that was completely, it was just completely their project. And we just came up with the framework for it. So that's what I have tried to do since that young man kind of woke me up there.